It's on. Hello, welcome all of you. This is, of course, our past president's address, and I am the current president, Glenn MacDonald. And I want to say that it is both an honor and it is bittersweet to be giving this introduction to my friend and colleague, Sarah Bednarz. Sarah is just recently minted Professor Emeritus of Geography at Texas A&M. The recently minted part is the Professor Emeritus. Prior to that, she was a professor in geography at Texas A&M, and she was also, for a period of time, the Associate Dean for Academic Affairs. Sarah's education in geography began with a bachelor at Mount Holyoke, master's in geographical education from the University of Chicago, and a PhD in curriculum and instruction of geography at Texas A&M. And from that early time, from her graduate student days, she has had a passion and a dedication and has made tremendous contributions to the education of geographers. And I don't simply mean the education in the realm of teaching the university level. I mean in helping develop then curriculum or advanced placement and seeing the spread of that to the K-12. She also is passionate about continuing education for geographers, education that will serve them and be available to them throughout their entire lives. And so she has really become, in this nation and certainly internationally, the leader in geographical education. And I do not think that even though she's gone to emeritus status, is now living in a beautiful place that everyone is insanely jealous of in Albuquerque, New Mexico, that passion or that engagement with our discipline and with the educating of geographers, whatever their age, will end. At Texas A&M, because of her excellence, she was named a presidential professor for teaching excellence. Aside from being the president of the American Association of Geographers and now the past president, she has also been honored with the Gilbert Grosvenor Honors, the George Miller Award, and the University Distinguished Academic Achievement Award. And so today, Sarah will share with us some of her thoughts on educating a geographer.
Well, thank you very much for coming. I jokingly said I was going to hand out sandwiches to the people who came because it's the lunch hour, but it was a joke. So, and thanks especially to my international friends who have come here so from great distance. So it's wonderful to see you on my home territory. My topic today is locating geography education, not placing it, but locating it. So let me start. I am a geography educator, a geographer that focuses on geography education. Geography education is not part of or a special form of education in general. Rather, it involves education in and about geographic knowledge, its perspectives, its content, its practices, and by people who are geographically trained. If a case must be made for the importance of geography education, I maintain it's central to the future of our discipline. Why? Well, education is the fundamental process of reproduction of a discipline. It involves teaching and learning geography in both formal and informal settings. The production of new geographic knowledge depends upon the reproduction of geographically informed people and on the willingness of society to support that production process in schools and colleges and universities and other contexts. There are also many other reasons for the importance, nay, the essentialness of geography education. Without seeming too much of a booster, it is clear to me that it is critical preparation for civil life, for the workplace, for personal and societal decision-making, let alone post-secondary education. As the publication Roadmap for the 21st Century Geography made clear, society will suffer if we neglect geography education. However, the point that geography education reproduces our discipline and is thus a core component of geography is not widely appreciated by academic geographers who use what Roger Downs termed adjectival distancing to separate the fundamental reproduction of the discipline from the central mission of all geographers. they've left it to a very small community of geographers and others to pay attention to this core process. This marginalization of geography education has long been a concern of mine. So for my presidential address, I set myself the task of reading the addresses of my predecessors, something very common for presidents to do, I discovered, to see the evolving role, nature, and relevance of geography education as viewed by former presidents. And I learned, actually in some periods, there's been genuine concern and interest, but it has been episodic and intermittent. And I have to say this research is very much still a work in progress. I really, really will appreciate all of your comments and suggestions and thoughts at some point after today. Just this morning on the elevator to come downstairs, Bob said, you know, I really think you should restructure it. And I said, not yet, okay. So for today, what I wish to do is present a brief history of changing practices in geography education in the United States to explore how it's been reflected in presidential comments and concerns. From my close reading, 42 presidents have said something relevant to geography education, either school level or related to preparing geographers in higher education contexts in their addresses. And I will focus primarily on pre-collegiate geography, but also comment on undergraduate and graduate education where appropriate. And I will use the key point of contention in geography education, teaching place geography, as a framework for some of this discussion. As I mentioned earlier, many presidents have followed the path I am taking. In 1974, Wilbur Zielinski wrote, "The traditional presidential address, as delivered before this association, has been in effect self-serving. The departing president may choose to justify his own scholarly career, usually by offering a statement of his personal approach to the discipline, or a report on his latest research feat, or else he sets forth a magisterial survey of the state of the discipline, past, present, and future. Although I impute nothing but the noblest motives to the authors," said Zielinski, "the results have tended to be narcissistic." Ron Abler, in 1987, identified two types of presidential addresses, the methods or philosophy address and the substance talk, a presentation of research. Since 1904, Abler characterized 42 talks as methods and 39 as substance. Ron, interestingly, chose to deliver a sermon, his words. Many have commented on others' addresses, most recently Tom Beerwald in 2009, who called it a long tradition for talks given by AAG presidents to address the nature of geography through the addresses of predecessors. Thornthwaite, in 1961, spent several days reading the annals. I've spent several weeks. My object, he said, was to learn what other speakers have said on similar occasions. Revealing because he found wide diversity as to the content and method of geography, but he noted the curriculum has become quite standardized everywhere. In 2013, Audrey Kobayashi provided a fascinating review of race as portrayed in past president addresses, a model for my own final paper. But it was Mel Marcus in 1979 who called the task of reading presidential addresses the closest approximation we find to purgatory on this earth. So I'm going to begin by looking at changing practices in geography education. And I'm starting by saying that for much of the 20th century, there's been a revolving debate on teaching and learning geography focused on place location, or locational geography, capes and bays geography, positional geography, place awareness, whatever you want to call it. Learning places for many, alas, is and has been the purpose of geography. This debate has made geography education a field rife with argument, disagreement, and contradiction, and relatively little research. You just have to read the Journal of Geography or Social Education since their inceptions to see a circular concern with this topic and how it has been conflated with teaching geography. Beginning in 1902, for example, in Albion, Michigan, students were given a comprehensive list of places to memorize, including the termini, direction of route, leading towns served, and abbreviations of all the railroads in the state. That's geography. At the same time, the superintendent of schools in New York City, referring to the memorization of long lists of rivers and mountains, etc., stated, "We do not attach much importance to that." In contrast, the Journal of Geography editor at the time and future AAG president Richard Elwood Dodge published an editorial asking, "Are we neglecting drill in location in our geography class?" In terms familiar to contemporary readers, he wrote, "It was not many years ago that geography was considered as primarily a subject in which all the important questions could be introduced with where. During the last decade, teachers have been using how and why much more than where, until it has come to an open question whether location of places is not neglected in school geography work." Dodge went on to say that parents may complain about newfangled methods of teaching, his words. In the period from 1902 to the end of the First World War, locational ignorance was frequently blamed on ill-prepared teachers, poor instructional strategies, and textbooks with few maps and too much extraneous information. As an example, in his 1905 presidential address, William Morris Davis decried that material was added to textbooks that was not geographic because they are worth knowing, and the pupils in our schools will have little chance of learning them if they are not brought in under the popular subject of geography. Poor school practices, as just recounted, impacted higher education. In 1909, Rollin D. Salisbury, president later in 1912, reported the results of a test he conducted at the University of Chicago. He noted two critical deficiencies in his students. One, a lack of knowledge of the location of places, and two, a lack of knowledge of what the places were, that is, whether they were a city, a river, or a country. I've heard of that, but I don't know what it is. Salisbury attributed this to the demise of old-fashioned geography and the increasing tendency to connect physical geography with the life of people in geography curricula, and ill-prepared teachers using progressive methods of teaching. The pages of the Journal of Geography were filled with lists of essential place names and locations. Groups of teachers compiled lists. In Minneapolis, minimal essentials for first-term 7th grade students were established. In 1926, a comprehensive list of 1,200 places was published. University faculty also contributed to list making. A college-based survey, this time at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, prompted Ray H. Whitbeck to restate the importance of place geography. He wrote, "We believe that whether the high school pupil later goes to a higher school or enters upon an occupation, he should be reasonably intelligent in matters of general locational geography." However, Whitbeck made no mention of this later in his 1925 presidential address, an interesting exercise in unsubtle racism and environmental determinism, in which he wrote, "The place makes the race, and then the race progressively remakes the place." Learning place names was likened to memorization in mathematics. Just like learning the ABCs and multiplication tables, so learning place names were viewed as an essential part of geography. A few geographers, notably Dodge, then at Columbia Teachers College, campaigned for a more rational study of place geography, calling for the humanization of the subject. He wrote, "Location of places as a matter of memory is not inherently interesting to most children, but location as studied in its relation to the strategic points that have been so vitally determined is a thing of interest." In his 1915 presidential address, Dodge wrote most persuasively about geography education. He wrote, "And we shall never have effective geography teaching until geographers and educators come to understand each other better, are more sympathetic toward each other's viewpoints, until they realize that their ideals have many factors in common and that their effectiveness can be secured only by teamwork." Among the issues other than place location he identified as needing attention were teacher training, noting that "we lament the poor teaching of geography in high school and yet do not aid in its betterment. Pedagogy was a related concern. Students, Dodge felt, needed to be actively engaged in learning and drawing relationships and not occupied with busy work like copying maps. From 1919 to 1945, the debate about the value of place geography continued in quite scathing terms, but with no research on optimal methods to teach. In 1926, Douglas Ridgely distinguished between the learning and teaching processes to recommend changes in place geography teaching. He wrote, "Results will improve as pupils realize they are being taught or shown how to learn about places by their own efforts, how to select significant facts worth knowing and worth remembering, how to relate the newly acquired facts to knowledge already acquired about the same places or other related places." A remarkably fresh and contemporary approach. This is also a period of relative quiet on issues related to education on the part of AAG presidents. Douglas Johnson's address in 1928, entitled The Geographic Prospect, compared geography in the United States with that of select countries in Europe, providing a detailed discussion of the status of the subject in universities and reasons for low prestige in some places. Part of the problem, opined Johnson, is that geography has long merely been a school subject, abominably taught. The reason for this is because the public is indifferent, he wrote, to serious geographic work. He listed a number of reasons for problems in geography in the United States, including that it had attracted an undue proportion of inferior men. The curriculum was too vast and poorly defined, and that there was too much teaching and textbook writing and not enough research. Johnson stated, "But I see no valid excuse, either in college or university, for a large array of courses in which overworked professors hand out pre-digested information to docile classes." It's kind of interesting to read that statement given the bifurcation of faculty today, with contingent faculty carrying the teaching responsibilities often and professors conducting deep research. 7 years later, Charles Colby, in his 1935 address, provided a history of the AAG since 1903, in which he observed, since Richard E. Dodge, then at Teachers College, launched the Journal of School Geography in 1897, great progress has been made in educational geography. This important field, now in the competent hands of the National Council of Geography Teachers, has commanded the attention of many American geographers. Well, this statement raises concerns in my mind for two reasons. First, there is no evidence that there was attention on the part of many American geographers. And second, it's clear that this is an example of the adjectival distancing that Roger Downs referred to. Colby separates the responsibility for the production of geographers from the association and hands it to others, educational geographers. Eventually, in this period, consensus developed among geographers on teaching place names. It was acknowledged that place geography taught valuable information. Writing in 1937, Richard Hartshorne recommended against returning to place name drills, but asked, have we not swung too far away from place names in our desire to get free of the former boredom? It was also acknowledged that students should be actively engaged in the process of learning. Good idea. Thus, place geography became an incidental byproduct of learning other kinds of geography. And if you look at the methods suggested to teach place names, they were included increased use of maps and globes, map activities that explicated the relationships between humans and the environment, the imaginary journey, always popular, fill-in-the-blank games, and studying postal stamps. No research was cited to validate these methods. In fact, sound arguments for applying research on learning to the development of teaching strategies was disregarded. Ellsworth Huntington, writing in 1942, but not in his presidential address, wailed, "In our attempts to make geography interesting and popular, we have been too ready to forget that every science requires hard work, solid work, which often involves considerable exercise of memory." During this period of time, curricular concerns dominated in the 1930s and 1940s. Geography was important because it would promote peace, Wallace C. Atwood wrote in 1934. No subject in the curriculum, he said, of our educational institutions lends itself so completely to this end as modern geography. No other subject deals with so many of the basic facts which should make for our better understanding of other peoples. In light of events in Europe, he asked, is there not a patriotism that can be based on something other than a pride in military power? Appropriate question for today, don't you think? Knowing geography would help children and adults better understand the importance, condition, and needs of their basic agricultural resources, according to Hugh H. Bennett in his 1943 presidential address. Specific changes to the curriculum were suggested, for example, in making the case for regional geography as a humanistic earth science. Verner C. Finch provided advice for young geographers. He must select a region, which is, above all else, to be the field of his lifelong study. He must invest greatly in time and effort to know his region from the inside, its people and their ideas, as well as its material forms and functional processes. And finally, it would help geographers to better understand each other if they studied both physical geography and historical cultural processes, thought Sauer in his first presidential address in 1940. Continuing the interest in geography education, in a very personal and interesting account, Robert S. Platt, who is on the far side, he is just talking to Derwent Whittlesey, who is in his academic robes. Platt wrote at the end of the war in 1945 about his experiences in microgeography, examining one area of Chicago where Midway Airport is today. He described the demographics and social studies room of Nathan Hale Elementary, a school disrupted by the Chicago Municipal Airport. His talk was illustrated with pictures of field reports being given by a social studies class, and he spent considerable time in the school and with the social studies teacher, who had some background in geography, and participating in field trips to local factories. Platt commented on education as it was evolving at that period of time, noting the tension between students learning about their own community and incentives to standardize and globalize education. Alas, Platt continued the tradition of separating the AAG from education. In answering the question, what do we want AAG to do, he stated, in general, we may agree that we want the association to serve geographers, to advance geographical knowledge, and to encourage geographical scholarship and leadership. But he went on to say basically, but that educational stuff, let's just leave that to the Council for Geography Teachers, and for workplace placement, the Association of Professional Geographers, which existed at that period of time. The post-war period, 1946 to 1975, saw renewed complaints about geographic ignorance as measured by place location, and new calls for drill and kill. Geographers were still compiling lists of place names, one gleaned from an analysis of the New York Times over a decade to suggest the 75 most visible cities and countries students should learn. I think that sounds like something you'd see on BuzzFeed today, but and there was sporadic interest on the part of presidents of the AAG about educational issues, beyond occasional comments to the health and vigor of geography as evidenced by growth in enrollments. Donald Hudson, speaking in 1951, examined undergraduate training and the increase in geography majors. State teachers' colleges were fueling the growth, he noted. Majors in geography are more prevalent among the members who graduate from teachers' colleges than they are among those who graduate from private institutions. Trends indicated are an increase in the number of geography and education majors and a decrease in all other subjects. Carl Sauer's second presidential address does not directly discuss geography education, but is a reflection on the education of a geographer. He took it as an opportunity to disapprove of undergraduate majors in geography, to coin the phrases the morphological eye and the geographic bent, to support geographers knowing physical geography, writing, Any kind of geographer profits by knowing how processes fashion any part of the face of the earth he studies, and to call for a more essential curriculum. He wrote, "A big departmental curriculum is probably a sign of bloating, not of fecundity." However, he insisted that a more essential curriculum must include fieldwork, foreign languages, knowing the history of geographic thought, and of several other things. Another president commenting on education was Thornthwaite, who, as I mentioned before, spent several days reading the annals to find out what people were thinking about and found wide diversity among geographers, but a consensus in terms of the curriculum. In his address, he made recommendations based on his understanding that there are three types of geography departments: those that train undergraduates, those who prepare teachers, and those who conduct fundamental research and train researchers. He wrote, "It must be understood that the training for future teachers of undergraduate geography is not adequate for future geographical scientists." Like Johnson and Sauer, Thornthwaite criticized bloated curriculum and course requirements. He actually analyzed a series of university catalogs to come up with this conclusion. And overall, he called for curriculum revision to include more rigor, including mathematics and statistics. It was 1961. He also recommended that every aspect of geography would be improved and strengthened through application of the heat and water balance. He wrote in his presidential address, "Already, a high school teacher in Chicago is presenting the water balance to his students. So if a high school teacher can do it, well." Thornthwaite's address captures the concerns of this era. By the 1960s, in the wake of Sputnik, which caused widespread panic about American education and a reappraisal of the discipline of geography, change was coming. People were referring to outmoded geography, primarily in terms of the overemphasis on the area studies tradition and a preoccupation with factual detail, as opposed to a search for concepts, models, and principles. The High School Geography Project began in 1961 to respond to these concerns. Capturing this more progressive approach, Clyde F. Cohen in 1966 recommended that students be taught the structure of geographic thought and to develop the ability to think geographically, that is, to use the methods of inquiry common to the profession of geography. In his 1969 presidential address, Cohen evaluated trends in research and instruction in the previous decade. He observed progress in geography as an abstract science, but expressed concern over the status and role of geography in schools and colleges and ways to make geographic education more effective. What were the implications for geography education of a decade of progress, he asked, stating emphatically, "Top-ranking scholars in our profession and departments of geography in our leading universities must place a higher priority upon such activities as teacher training, curriculum development, the preparation and appropriate teaching materials, the development of stimulating learning activities, and good teaching at the undergraduate level." He lauded the High School Geography Project and the recently launched Commission on College Geography as attempting to close the gap between professional geography as it's being practiced and the kind of geography commonly taught in our public schools and colleges. Cohen praised the pedagogical approaches used by the High School Geography Project, such as simulations, case studies, inquiry-based approaches to learning and decision-making processes. The methods used in that project would benefit college-level instruction, he noted as well. Overall, he made a strong statement on progress in geographic research and the need for concurrent work in geographic education. Sadly, however, the High School Geography Project was not being implemented in our schools, and geography education was in serious decline. The 1970s and early 1980s were a period of bleakness, and perhaps the lowest point in the history of pre-collegiate geographic education. It's when I started teaching, while a high point in collegiate geography. The discipline-based, reformist, inquiry-rich High School Geography Project was attacked, and there were calls both within the discipline and outside with the general public for a return to fundamentals. And not surprisingly, geographic illiteracy continued to be rediscovered periodically, largely due to surveys of place names that alarmed the public. The American public valued what they perceived to be geography's contribution to general education: place, name, location. As Al Forsyth wrote, learning place location geography is important for several reasons, not the least of which is that many non-geographers believe it is. Fritz Gritzner, writing in the Journal of Geography, recounted a dozen stories from this period of time in U.S. newspapers, each of which centered on students' lack of locational knowledge. David Helgren of San Jose State University appeared on national television after he assessed place name ignorance among his students, and Johnny Carson talked about it in his monologue. Two professors from Berkeley wrote their dean requesting a diagnostic entrance exam for freshmen to determine who needed remediation in map skills and place location. Reviewing the ongoing debate in 1987, Boehm and Peterson wrote, "Whether we like it or not, geographers have a de facto responsibility to teach children these facts, just as mathematicians have a responsibility to introduce multiplication tables and English teachers to give spelling tests," thus reviving the mathematics analogy first posited in the early 1900s. It was at this point that many geographers began to truly be alarmed about the plight of the subject in schools. The geography education community has long characterized the discipline in the progressive rhetoric of Renaissance and reform. Certainly, geography education has seen a renaissance or marked improvement since the low point just described. It began in the early 1980s, sparked by general concerns regarding American education, captured in the groundbreaking book, A Nation at Risk. A series of reform efforts commenced. A group of geographers under the shared auspices of the American Association and the National Council for Geographic Education published Guidelines for Geographic Education, Elementary and Secondary Schools. This slim document presented geography as a unified scientific discipline that teachers and the public could understand via 5 core themes. This document laid the foundation for and initiated the campaign to improve geography education in the United States, largely through the concerted dissemination efforts of the National Geographic Society's State Alliances for Geography, begun in 1986. At the same time, national education goals were developed that identified geography as a core academic subject, with 2 important outcomes. First, geography became a subject assessed by the National Assessment for Educational Progress, NAEP, and second, federal funding was provided to write national standards in geography, an effort led by Roger Downs. The Renaissance was certainly noted and encouraged by presidents of the AAG. In his presidential address, 1983, Richard L. Morrill identified 6 responsibilities of geography, the second of which is service to the discipline of geography as a body of knowledge and a core of people. He noted as a vulnerability the collective inability to strengthen the role of geography in elementary and secondary school curricula. He reflected about concerns regarding geographic illiteracy. It would be truly self-destructive, he wrote, if we failed to take advantage of the public interest in the basics and of recent publicity on the ignorance of American students and citizens of the most basic elementary facts of world geography. We have to mount a far more vigorous effort to publicize clearly just what aspects of geography we believe American students need to know and why, and what standards we expect of those who teach geography. He cited the joint AAG-NCGE committee that led to the 5 themes as an effort underway to remedy the situation. There was momentum for change. Pierce Lewis, 1985, began his address by discussing geographic illiteracy, recounting cycles of concern based on surveys of place location and following sanctimonious newspaper editorials. He expressed his frustration about the situation. First, as geographers, we knew this was nothing new in America. Even more galling, he wrote, was that intelligent people, like newspaper editors, writing these editorials, equate geographic literacy with knowing the location of Nicaragua. He complained also about cocktail party questions about being a geographer, the message being, although the American public does not know much geography, the public is not indifferent to geography. And the second message was that the public knows very little about geography as an academic or professional field. Lewis included advice relevant to today's attempts to garner respect and attention to geography, citing the most important task we face is to persuade the public about the importance of asking the right geographic questions and getting reliable answers to those questions. He concluded his talk by dispensing advice on educating tomorrow's geographers, including the admonition that it's important to study both physical geography and history, echoing Sauer. Continuing the tradition of speaking enthusiastically about improvements in geography education, Ron Abler in 1987 praised the collaboration across the 4 professional geography associations to support geography education. This was in the form of an organization known as the Geography Education National Implementation Project, or GENIP. For the next decade, wrote Abler, at least, the AAG should speak forcefully and in concert with our partners in GENIP to improve geography in our schools. Taking an historical approach, Abler observed, the association's early leaders devoted considerable attention to geography being taught in our nation's schools. The devotion waned in the 1920s. We are now eating the bitter fruit. Neither our students nor our national leaders have been exposed to sound, exciting geography. He recognized that the U.S. has good undergraduate and graduate geography education, but he wrote, we've built it without a foundation of equally high-quality elementary and secondary school teaching. He concluded, speaking directly and forcefully to the inadequacies of geographic education will repair a deficiency that has crippled American geography throughout the association's history. Well, following this, in 1988, the National Geographic Society conducted its first International Geographic Literacy Survey, Big Splash. The results were dismal, and public concern over geography education swelled once again. George Demko, in a very brief address that year, commented, "This is a time when the public is rediscovering geography. Our media bemoan our nation's geographic ignorance. It's a grand opportunity to capitalize on a wave of public concern about the need for geography." Momentum and presidential support for geography education flagged at this crucial point, despite key events in the reform of geography education, including the release of Geography for Life, the National Geography Standards in 1994. That is, until Larry Brown's talk in 1998 here in Boston, in which he used his own research to examine change, continuity, and the pursuit of geographic understanding. In the talk, Brown presented an homage to what he termed the geographer's craft, noting it was an era in which geography was highly valued because of our perspective, but also owing to factors such as GIS and Geog-Ed, his term. Continuing this enthusiasm for geography and geography education, Pat Gober, in the following year, in a powerful address, began by making the point that American geography was in a period of growth and prosperity. She reasoned that this was because we have linked our expertise to national policy initiatives in technology, education, and global and environmental issues. Gober cited the development of the nascent AP Human Geography course as an indicator of success. However, she worried that this would not continue unless geographers recognized synthesis as the appropriate role for geography in interdisciplinary work. She cited enthusiasm for the discipline and that pre-collegiate geography was at an all-time high. But she cautioned that graduate training and traditional means of preparing PhDs was a barrier to synthesis and called for reconsiderations of advanced graduate work. Too often, she felt, students failed to integrate the perspectives of geography. In 2001, Reg Gollage presented the most openly educational address since Dodge's in 1915. He focused on the nature of geographic knowledge, outlining in rich detail what it means to think geographically. Gollidge made a strong case for the uniqueness of geographic thinking as a cognitive process and called for curriculum that emphasized this uniqueness through the National Geography Standards. And he also called attention to the importance of spatial thinking and the National Research Council study, chaired by Roger Downs, underway on that topic. Gollidge concluded with a series of 10 questions that the discipline must face as we moved into the 21st century, and stated that many of them could best be answered by and through geography education. The following year, after 9/11, National Geographic repeated its International Place Location Survey, More Scare. The results once again attracted the attention to the plight of geography education through locational knowledge. The lead on the press release was that 83% of young Americans aged 18 to 24 could not even find Afghanistan on a world map. This is after 9/11. While not commenting on this latest round of alarm over geographic illiteracy, Jan Monk's address in 2003 was directly relevant to geography education as a history of many of the women who were teachers in largely teacher preparatory or normal schools in the early part of the 20th century. Of course, most high school teachers were women, as were many of the instructors in teachers' colleges. Monk also had thoughts about the gendered nature of graduate education in geography, relevant to any discussion of geography education. And she featured instructors from my alma mater, Mount Holyoke College, Glenn, Holyoke, including the wonderful Minnie Lemaire. Duane Ellis, a past president of the National Council for Geographic Education, spoke strongly about his links to geography education and integrated National Geographic Society Alliance teachers into his talk, a marvelous way to feature this key network for reform. He also discussed the need for enhanced undergraduate education, especially the incorporation of high-impact educational practices such as undergraduate research and study abroad. And as no surprise, Alec Murphy in 2005 provided a deep acknowledgement of the important role geography education plays in the health of the discipline. Having chaired the test development committee of the Advanced Placement Human Geography group, he was well aware of the growing impact of this program on the discipline. But interestingly, he distinguished between geographers and educators, stating, "Let the educators among us champion the need for students to know something about the places where they live and other places around the world," a statement that could have been written in the early part of the 20th century. Murphy provided excellent advice about the role for public geography, hearkening back to previous presidential addresses when individuals, notably Pierce Lewis, made the point that the public knows little of our discipline and that we need to better communicate with them. Murphy interestingly also called for renewed interest in regional courses, so often lambasted by previous presidents. He's shrinking, hiding behind his hands now. So. Repeating the message of Wallace Atwood from the 1930s about geography's role in developing international understanding, Kvita Pundit in 2008 spoke about geography education, but not in the way geography educators might expect. She outlined an ambitious plan for geographers to take the lead in internationalization of higher education. Echoing Murphy, she noted that internal debates on the place of regional geography have complicated the role that she would have expected geographers to take in study abroad initiatives and other moves to internationalize the curriculum. She made a strong case for geography to be the foundational discipline in international education, writing, "Clearly, the need to promote geographic literacy and equip students with a spatial perspective continues to be urgent." Ken Foote, another past president of NCGE, in 2012 examined ways to nurture new talent, cultivate leaders, and promote innovation in both education and research. And I have to say, more than any other living president, Ken has worked to enhance exemplary undergraduate education, graduate education, and early career faculty transitions in the professoriate. So we come to the present and nearly the end of time, at least the end of my time. So let me just summarize a few points. First, the goal of a well-developed mental map or rich place location has been controversial in geography. It's a subject that has elicited commentaries, editorials, and strong opinions, but little research. The debate has been circular and predictable. First, an alarm is sounded by a flurry of news articles concerning geographical ignorance. These are followed by suggestions on techniques to teach place names, usually recycled old activities like the imaginary trip. Eventually, an opposing viewpoint appears, reminding readers that geography is more than place names, that memorization is not an effective technique to teach anything worth remembering, and so on. Second, presidents of the AAG have, over time, been interested in, concerned about, and yet strangely ambivalent about the education of geographers and geography education. Several have joined in the debate on place names, more have spoken about the position of the discipline in schools, and a number have called for curricular revisions and improvements in graduate education over the years. Others have plainly delegated concern for the reproduction of the discipline to others. The recent decade has been remarkable for consistent and supportive remarks and actions. The question now is how to sustain this disciplinary commitment. As president of this organization, I remain concerned about the marginalization of geography education. The roadmap for 21st century geography education characterized our geography education research community as unfocused, fragile, underfunded, and disconnected with other education research. The document laid out recommendations to build capacity, some of which are being implemented, but only some. And we're in a period of change and transition, both in the AAG and the National Geographic Society, two key partners in geography education. The other partner, the National Council for Geographic Education, has seen a decline in college and university membership. It's difficult to recruit geographers, for example, to participate in the annual Advanced Placement Human Geography readings, one of the most exciting opportunities in geography education currently. And it's becoming increasingly difficult to close the gap, thus, between school geography and our discipline. In comparison, the science community embraces science education much more wholeheartedly than we do. I'm just saying. It just seems that today, more than ever, we need to heed the words of Richard Elwood Dodge, spoken over 100 years ago. We shall never have effective geography teaching until geographers and educators come to understand each other better, are more sympathetic with each other's viewpoint, until they realize that their ideals have many factors in common and that their effectiveness can be secured only by teamwork. Thank you.
I want to thank Sarah very much for that, and I also want to thank her from my position as president. I said that introducing her was bittersweet, and I didn't explain why. I think you've seen how smart Sarah is, how organized she is, her encyclopedic knowledge of the history of our discipline, her dedication, and a bit of her good humor. You could imagine then that serving with her on council as her vice president and then as president has been absolutely fantastic. And she has certainly educated me many, many ways about this association, about my duties, and about how we can be the best we possibly can as your council. So I will very much miss her, and that's why this moment for me is bittersweet, knowing that we had our last council meeting together at the beginning of this week. So Sarah, on behalf of the council and the president, I want to thank you for all you've done for this association in your leadership role. Please join me. Now I'd like to call Roger Downs to please come up.
Thanks, Glenn. So I was joking earlier that Roger Downs hates to have his picture taken. And when I saw this was the publicity page from Penn State about him receiving this award, I said, oh my gosh, just look at, what is he saying? What's the thought bubble coming over his face? You know, it's just like, get out of my office, I do not want my picture taken, right? So it is a great pleasure to be able to give this award to Roger Downs. He's being recognized for his groundbreaking research on the development of spatial cognition in children, spatial thinking with and through geospatial technologies, and the nature and the development of expertise in geography. He's worked closely with colleagues in psychology, including his co-author Lynn Libben, and other behavioral sciences to explore the intersection of geography and the cognitive sciences, and to produce truly leading-edge work in cognitive mapping and spatial behavior. But to me personally, his contribution comes that I believe Roger, and I tried to highlight this in my talk, has largely been responsible for the renaissance in geography education. Roger helped to shape the National Assessment for Educational Progress framework, which led to the collection of meaningful data for the first time about what American students really do know and can do with their geographic knowledge. He led the team that wrote the National Geography Standards, and you talk about a process that was rife with contention and excitement. He helped shape the National Research Council study on learning to think spatially, and he guided the Geography Education National Implementation Project for over a decade, building key relationships between geography education and collaborators such as Esri, College Board, NASA, NOAA, and the Association of State Legislatures. All while chairing, I understand quite successfully, the Department of Geography at Penn State, and conducting this wonderful research, and always being where he needed to be to help promote geography education, and personally to be a wonderful mentor to me. So Roger, I am very pleased to give you the 2017 Presidential Achievement Award. So.
I think I've been very lucky for a couple of reasons. One, which is I had good genes, which meant longevity, which means I've been around for a long time. And secondly, I've been really lucky to have good colleagues. And I take this award as something that represents the whole of the field of geography education. Many of those good colleagues are out in the audience today, and it's equally well your success. So thank you very much indeed. What do I have to do now?
I'm also giving Roger a March for Geography, March for Science hat, because he has been instrumental in leading the geographical sciences over the last decade as well. And I encourage all of you to buy these hats and to march for science. Geography is a science. So thank you very much for coming here today.
Okay, put it on.
There you go.